In his speech to Congress on Tuesday, Donald Trump set an ambitious goal: balance the federal budget. But as a Fox News anchor Maria Bartiromo tried to explain to him in an interview this morning, he can't do that without going after entitlements.
When you look at where the spending is, 76% of the spending going to the mandatory programs, don't you have to really cut into those mandatory programs in order to really make a dent? You say you're going to balance the budget.
Yeah,
you can't balance the budget just by DOGE cuts,
We're
right?
going to have growth like you've never seen before.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you said that.
We're going to have growth. I'm not going to touch Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Now, we're going to get fraud out of there.
Put a pin in that one, folks. Yeah, okay. Because the Congressional Budget Office ran the numbers, and they found that to balance the budget, Republicans will have to cut from Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. That safety net, those benefits. And Americans don't want that, especially when it comes to Social Security, the single largest program in the federal budget. A poll from January found that more than 2/3 of all Americans think we're not spending enough on Social Security, and only 6% think we're spending too much. Here's the deal. There's a reason it's the third rail of American politics, but that's not stopping Republicans from wrapping their hands around it. Elon Musk has been repeating the line that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. And in his speech on Tuesday, Donald Trump actually lied about millions of dead people receiving benefits. Even the guy Trump installed to lead the Social Security Administration has said that that's not true. But it doesn't seem like he has much control over what's going on. The Washington Post reported this week that privately, senior staff has been told that DOGE is running the show and that they will make mistakes. Reports are already emerging about long wait times and delays in reviewing disability claims. And soon all of this meddling could mean that people don't get their checks on time. I mean, folks, take a moment. Do you really trust Elon Musk to get you your checks on time? Well, the most recent commissioner of the Social Security Administration definitely does not. Martin O'Malley told CNBC, ultimately, you're going to see this system collapse and an interruption of benefits. I believe you will see that within the next 30 to 90 days. And he added that people should start saving now. Joining me now is Martin O'Malley. He served as the commissioner of the Social Security Administration under President Biden. Before that, he was governor of the great state of Maryland. It's great to have you at the table, Governor. So it's good to see you, man. So if Social Security misses payments, it would be the first time in 90 years of its existence that will have ever happened. What exactly are you seeing that DOGE is doing that makes you so worried?
Wow. Do I call you Lieutenant Governor, Chairman, Excellency?
Friend words.
There are several things they're doing, Michael. It appears they're doing everything they can to break this agency, to degrade customer service, and these acts are also, and to drive employees out of this agency. Keep in mind, the Republican House was reducing staffing and cutting Social Security before the DOGE bros even had driver's licenses. So this agency was serving more and more people every single day because of us baby boomers, with staffing that was reduced to a 50-year low. So the biggest threat to the agency is the way they're driving experienced, knowledgeable employees out of it, including those who are about 30 to 40% retirement eligible that run the IT systems. So what we're going to see is more and more intermittent shutdowns of the processing apps, and also, yesterday for a time, the portal that allows people to check their MySSA account went down. You're going to see more of that for longer durations. You're already seeing the wait times, the lines, all going again in the wrong direction after they were made to go in the right and more timely direction by the end of last year. They're all going in the wrong direction. And then you're going to see all of those things having a cascading effect, because just because that base of the IT IT system, that old COBOL system is old, doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be maintained. And the people that know how to maintain it, get this, are being paid for an entire year if they will leave now and not let the door hit their backside on the way out. That's the waste.
I see that, as sort of the linchpin to a lot of this. It is not about the functionality of the system. It is about a clearing of the decks. We want these people out. If this system collapses, certainly that's going to be a devastating thing. How then do you get things up and running again? I mean, at some point, when your cousin, your aunt, your mom, your dad, yourself don't get that check that you need to cover your expenses, whether it's health care, whether it's other things you may use your Social Security payments for, what do people do? And how do you get the system back online?
40% of seniors living alone over the age of 65, Michael, depend entirely on Social Security. Yeah. It's the difference between, living under a bridge, living in poverty, or living with dignity. I suspect just like after they fired the people that knew the nuclear codes, they're going to realize that they fired some really talented, experienced IT people that understand how to get these systems back up and running again, especially if, as I believe they are, if they drive this to a system collapse and an interruption of benefits within the next 90 days. Whether those people are willing to come back, how quickly they come back, or how long those benefit interruptions last is anybody's guess. Because just because these are some of the only folks in the country that understand the architecture of that system, and of course what I learned was it's not just about knowing how to write COBOL code, it's understanding the architecture and all of the apps and customer service IT systems that sit on top of it. So these are talented people. They not only know COBOL and the architecture of Social Security and how to make sure everybody keeps getting their check on time, they also have options in the private sector to go to other places. So they're creating a mess. It's a mess of their own making. Our fellow Marylander, Barbara Mikulski, texted me and said they're trying to break it so they can privatize it. Yeah. I think they're trying to break it so they can loot it. They want what's in that Social Security trust fund for some reason. And they now have these kids in T-shirts mucking around up there, going through people's personal data, plugging into systems that they can't even read and understand themselves, which is why they concluded that there was some zombie apocalypse with tens of millions of people walking around with checks spewing out of their cadaverous pockets. It's a real mess up there. And the guy running it only ran an office of about 5 people before, but he's doing whatever they ask of him.
Yeah, there we are. And that's it. It's the zombie apocalypse within our Social Security Administration.
Post reports that the acting head of the Social Security Administration, Leland Dudick, plans to slash around 12% of the agency's workforce. That's about 7,000 jobs. Dudick is also looking to close regional Social Security offices all around this country, a move that could lead to longer wait times for beneficiaries. The Post reports that Dudick puts the blame for those cuts on DOGE and admits that DOGE people are learning and will make mistakes. Dudick also admitted DOGE is filled with, quote, outsiders who are unfamiliar with nuances of SSA programs. What could possibly go wrong?
Okay, 7,000 people. So they've decided that these 7,000 people have basically just been functionaries in the government and don't do anything. They just show up and sit at a desk all day long and refuse to answer phones. Is that basically what they're saying?
Well, unless you're in Oklahoma, because there was a congressman who has Social Security Administration offices in his district who petitioned to DOGE and the federal government and said, no, don't close these in my district. These are jobs that my constituents need. And then he posted on his social media, on the site formerly known as Twitter, that, thanks to conversations with Doge, I have saved the, Social Security Administration office in this particular district. And I think it was Chris Murphy that made the point that this is the problem with what is going on with this administration and why he talks about the threat of losing our democracy. You have to bend the knee, and it's like, oh, please, dear leader, please, government, let me keep this. And so you got Republicans who are able to negotiate their way back for their constituents. You have Democrats that can't. Meanwhile, are people going to get their Social Security checks next month?
Well, yeah, because you don't know who these 7,000 people are. They don't know who these 7,000 people are, and they don't know exactly the impact that they're going to have on the Social Security system. So your question is a real question, because even if you say, yes, they'll get their check next month, okay, well, how is that process affected? Will it be later? Because it's on a cycle. First of the month, those checks land in bank accounts. Who's now going to monitor that process to make sure that any glitches are handled and processed correctly, et cetera? So yeah, this whole idea of to your point about the congressman going and to Doge and begging them to spare his little Social Security office in his district reminds me of, that period in history where you would go and you would petition the king, since Donald Trump wants to be a king, and you would beg the king to have mercy so that you could move your farm or, work your farm a little bit differently or do whatever you need to do. This is what we've come to. And I don't understand why Republicans are allowing this to play out this way, because it's impacting your own people.
And
yet,
one of the most heartbreaking things I have heard is, I think, among people who are clear-eyed and are watching what is happening, saying, well, I hope that people who receive Social Security are able to save in the next few months in case all of a sudden payments are delayed. Do you know how older people in this country live? If they had the capacity to be saving money, we'd be in a different place. We're talking about money that people use to get by month to month. For a lot of folks, there's not savings that is possible between now and when Elon Musk decides not to send those checks out. And on top of everything that we have already talked about, they're not going after people's private information. You have unions asking the courts to stop Doge from accessing Social Security data for millions of Americans. Let me read you this quickly. Included in the filing is an affidavit from Tiffany Flick, a former senior official at the agency, who says career civil servants are trying to protect the data from Doge. A disregard for our careful privacy systems and processes now threatens the security the data SSA houses about millions of Americans. Flick wrote that in court documents. So maybe you're worried about the payments. Maybe you're worried about the fact that they now have your Social Security number.
But can I just real quick on that point about the savings, having, managed the affairs of my mother before she passed away on Medicaid and my dad now on Medicare. There are no savings. You know why there are no savings, folks? Because the government won't allow you to save. You can't accumulate income. There's a cap in how much you can have in your bank account, and that's roughly $6,000 if you're married. If you're married. If you're not, it's half that. So, if you're only allowed a certain amount of money to accumulate in your bank account in order to be on Medicaid, for example, where do you save? And now you're putting these incompetent buffoons in charge of managing the system, which they have no clue about, number one. And number two, are sitting there making judgments over getting your private personal information. And what are you going to do with that, Elon? Exactly. Why do you need my parents' information? Why do you need their? And then, of course, is this little ditty? You've got Doge now going out trying to access sensitive child support information. What do you need? Why do you need to know who's paying child support? I mean,
why? Why do you want the information?
Well,
that is all we should be saying. Why? Why do you want to know this?
And why are Republicans allowing him to have that kind of access?
Well, here's the thing. I know you were both throwing it out as a rhetorical question, but let's listen to Elon Musk talking to Joe Rogan about Social Security, and some of the answer to your question is embedded in what he said. Take a listen.
Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
Right, explain that.
Oh, so, well, people pay into Social Security, and and the money goes out of Social Security immediately. But the obligation for Social Security is your entire retirement career.
Okay, no, he don't. He
This
is
is
yet
a
to
man who's
answer.
not going to pay Social Security.
I don't doubt that Elon Musk is a very brilliant man when it comes to Teslas and rockets and all those.
They
types
blowing
of
up,
things.
so I don't know how good
well,
that is.
which is why we said yesterday he needs to take some more attention to his day job, because the rockets. This is the second rocket that's blown up like this.
They're not rocketing.
The last couple of months, they're not rocketing. I don't doubt that he's a brilliant man on that, but like this, just because you are great at one thing, I'm an excellent communicator. I am not your finance person, okay? So, don't be calling me to do the finance. My husband does the finances at our house, because that's how we got some money. If I was doing the finances, we wouldn't have any cash. So you got to know your strengths. And I don't think Elon Musk knows his strengths here. 72.5 million people rely on Social Security. He said it's the biggest Ponzi scheme. They are setting it up to be cut.
Right.
That is what they are saying. The president is like, we're not going to touch Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Elon Musk is saying it's a big Ponzi scheme. Now more Republicans, they're going to cut your Social Security. They're coming for Social Security, folks. In 80 years, they haven't missed a payment. Next month, there likely will not be payments that go out. And if Republicans have their way, they're going to cut your Social Security, your Medicaid, and your Medicare to pay for their benefit, for their tax cuts for the richest people in this country.
For Elon Musk.
Do something about it.
To pay for Elon Musk. That's bottom line. You want a visual?
Call your people.
That's what it is.
Call your elected officials. Ask them, hey, do you support what Elon Musk said? Do you think Social Security is a Ponzi scheme? Will you vote to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? Ask them and get them on the record, folks. Call the number.
And then fax them on top of it.
Canada is done with Trump's tariffs, the ones he's enacted and the ones he's threatening to enact. NBC News reports Canadians are removing American liquor and California wines from their store shelves. They're pulling back on future visits to the U.S. They're pushing Buy Canadian to counter higher costs and spite Trump. And they are uncharacteristically brandishing unvarnished anger over what they see as a betrayal by a longtime friend. British Columbia's premier told NBC News, quote, "We're going to ensure that the Americans understand how pissed off we are, how unified we are, how committed we are to working as a country to stand up for each other." Joining us now is Canada's Minister of Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs, the Honourable Dominic LeBlanc. Welcome, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. LeBlanc. It is good to see you. Do you see a path for restabilizing relations between the two countries?
I hope so. As your introduction said, Canadians are showing perhaps an uncharacteristic level of emotion or frustration, anger at what's happening to our economy. We think it's unjustified. If you look at how the two countries going back to Ronald Reagan have operated in a free trade context and built an economic and security partnership that we think should be the envy of the world at a time when the world is getting more complicated, when China represents a significant threat to our economy and our security. More than anything, we want to work together in partnership with the Americans like we have for decades. So Canadians are frustrated that these tariffs are being imposed on us. The government of Canada obviously responded, retaliated, as we said we would, and imposed our own retaliatory tariffs. But we very much want to get to a position as quickly as possible where all these tariffs are lifted, and we can get back to working on building a secure and prosperous economy in North America. I'm encouraged by my conversations with Secretary Howard Lutnick. He and I have gone back and forth a lot over the last number of weeks and speak quite regularly. I'm hoping we can find our way forward to get back to a position where we're working together on other threats and not simply attacking one another's economy, which isn't in the interests of certainly of the Canadian economy, and I would argue American consumers as well.
Minister, the problem, though, the challenge that we have in this relationship right now is not, born out of something that Canada and the United States have been fighting over for a long, long time. It is born out of the peak of one man who, for whatever reason, has it out for Canada. I want to play for you Donald Trump and what he had to say about reciprocal tariffs on Friday. That really kind of goes to Alicia's question about, well, is there room to work things out? Let's listen.
Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs for lumber and for dairy products. 250%. Nobody ever talks about that. 250% tariff, which is taking advantage of our farmers. So that's not going to happen anymore. They'll be met with the exact same tariff unless they drop it. And that's what reciprocal means. And we may do it as early as today, or we'll wait till Monday or Tuesday. But that's what we're going to do.
So where do you work with that guy?
Well, it starts by respecting the government the Americans elected. President Trump won the election in November. He chose his cabinet secretaries. Our obligation as a partner government, as a G7 partner, as a NATO partner, as a NORAD partner, as a free trade partner, should be to work with the government the Americans have elected. Our job is to defend and build the Canadian economy. We think that there's ample room where those two lines intersect. President Trump's comments about dairy, for example, go back to the U.S., Mexico, Canada Free Trade Agreement, CUSMA, which he negotiated in his first term and signed and said was a fantastic agreement. All of the measures that he's now saying are unfair were measures that he agreed to in a free trade agreement that he renegotiated with Canada and Mexico less than 10 years ago. So my conversations with Secretary Lutnick make me think that if we work together, we can find a way to get Canada and Mexico, I think maybe of the same mind, in a position where the global tariff, reciprocal tariff decisions that Mr. Lutnick and the president will make in early April, we hope can accept that because of the CUSMA agreement. Happy to discuss improving it, happy to discuss reviewing it with the Americans. We've said that if they want to review the CUSMA agreement or discuss things that they don't think are working for the American economy, we too have a list of things that we'd be happy to discuss. But let's do that in a coherent partnership context where we're not applying tariffs that change week over week to one another. That doesn't seem the best way to improve an agreement that we're happy to discuss, because we think it should be the basis of prosperity for both countries.
Well, and especially because the prosperity for your country is tied not just to your fellow countries in North America, but also to the global tariffs that this administration is proposing. China has hit Canada with tariffs in indirect opposite to Trump. Quote, China announced tariffs of up to 100% on canola, pork, and other foods from Canada on Saturday. The Chinese tariffs, which take effect on March 20th, were also a clear warning to Canada and indirectly Mexico not to cooperate with the United States on trade. The Trump administration, like the Biden administration before it, has been demanding that Canada and Mexico not serve as backdoors for low-cost Chinese goods to enter the U.S. market under North American free trade agreements. Your response, Minister?
So we agree. There's an area where we entirely agree with the American administration, with President Trump, with his predecessor, President Biden, and his administration. China cannot use Mexico, or our concern obviously is Canada, as a way to dump from their non-market economy goods into North America in a way that violates the spirit and the letter of the free trade agreement. So we, in the Biden administration last fall, matched 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. We matched steel and aluminum tariffs that the United States brought in against China. What you saw there was the Chinese response. They're going to retaliate against Canada. That's fine. We'll support those industries and do what's necessary to ensure. I represent the east coast of Canada, my district. They'll be fishing lobster and snow crab in the Gulf of St. Lawrence soon and selling it to Boston. This is the kind of trading relationship that's important. Some of that seafood goes to China. So these are challenges for us. I said to Secretary Bessent earlier last week that if he wanted to have a conversation about how Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. could work together and put the appropriate tariff measures against China to deal with their dumping into the North American economy, we would be all in having those conversations, and as much as possible doing it, the three of us together, That's the way we can build a strong North American economy. But you're right, the Chinese will retaliate. But we think it's more important to be a reliable partner for the United States and Mexico. And we'll deal with the Chinese as best as we can. But we're a lot stronger dealing with the Chinese if it's Canada, Mexico, and the United States than sort of having them play one of us against the other two. That would not be a good scene either.
Minister, that point is an excellent one. The idea that you have China, coming up against the unified efforts of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And at the core of all of that, though, and specifically one last point to you, is the relationship government to government, for sure, because that's what's driving a lot of the conversation. But Prime Minister Trudeau, I think, really kind of framed this a little bit different. If you could just listen real quick to what he had to say to Americans about all of this.
We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you.
And Minister, that's the point. This is not a decision that the Canadians want government to government because they know the impact on people.
And you're right. We obviously worry about Canadian exporters, Canadian jobs, the cost of living in Canada. But because we have to, as a sovereign, proud, independent country would, retaliate or respond to this with our own tariffs, you can see how it becomes quickly a race to the basement. And the people who will pay the price are consumers in your great country and consumers in Canada. The Prime Minister, I think, reflected, I was thinking about this coming down to the studio in Ottawa this morning. I don't think there's one Canadian that doesn't have a personal connection to the United States. I studied there. I have cousins that live there. I visit the United States all the time. I live in a border province. But the relationships, like in my province on the east coast of Canada, New Brunswick, on the New Brunswick Maine border, literally they have volunteer fire departments that work together and come across the border if there's a fire. The relationship is economic, it's personal, it's familial, it's ideological. There's so many of the same values have bound our country together. In all the biggest conflicts in the world, we've stood together. And that's why this is so difficult for Canadians to understand. In your introduction, you talked about premiers, our equivalent of governors, using the provincial liquor stores to take American wine and booze off the shelves. It's a symbolic thing that sort of expresses the frustration. But you can see why this is difficult. It's difficult for Canadians. It's difficult for our economy. And I hope our American friends realize that, as the Prime Minister said, we want this to be over as quickly as possible so we can work together on security issues, environmental issues, challenges like China. This is much more constructive than figuring out a way to try and vandalize some sector of the economy in North America.
All right. We really appreciate it. Finance Minister, Honorable Dominic LeBlanc, thank you so much. For the second time in 2 years.
Have a great Sunday. Thanks for inviting me on the program.
You got it, my friend.
Joining me now is Candace Lang, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Candace, thanks for joining us here. I'm curious the mood in Canada after this last week of the on-again, somewhat off-again tariffs from the U.S.
Well, thanks for having me, Alex. And you are right. It is not picture postcard at all. Our polling data tells us where we stand, but also it is just a palpable sense of loss and grief amongst Canadians. The majority are, expressing anger and frustration, and the remaining are really rooted in a sense of probably fear and anxiousness. And that fear and anxiousness, I think, is exasperated by the state of politics in Canada. And today is a very big day. We will have a new prime minister announced later today, and then expect to go quite quickly into an election following that, potentially on April 28th or May 5th. We will see. But I think, Alex, we are anticipating and hoping that a new prime minister means a pivot in what we're seeing seeing today in Canada-U.S. relations. And as you've just shared, we know President Trump is pretty clear about his feelings for Prime Minister Trudeau. So that's my biggest hope, is that today marks a pivot and we can find a new way forward and focus on what matters most.
I know that the Canadian Chamber of Commerce collaborated in D.C. last week with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and focused on manufacturing, also supply chains between our countries. What did American representatives say about the tariffs? Are they alarmed? Are they worried?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on which Americans you're talking with. Definitely across the business community, we know how strong our cross-border integrated supply chains are and the benefits to both of our economies. Typically, and I was in D.C. last week for a supply chain mission, and we talk amongst the business community. Most often, we would be having those discussions. How do we bolster and strengthen our cross-border integrated supply chains? This time, our discussion was a bit different. We were talking more about, how do we ensure there's a full comprehension of how integrated and beneficial our supply chains are, which is just so important. And it seems to be kind of behind the strategy of the Trump administration, unfortunately, to use a broad approach, walk in with a broad approach to tariffs, and then walk back based on the regressive impacts that are felt. We know what the impacts are, but I think, Alex, what's troubling is I think we have to walk through, feel the pain points in order to find our way through, even though we know how beneficial our supply chains are to our economies.
Yeah, well, that's nothing you want to look forward to, those pain points, but you're probably right. Let me ask you about this weekend. China announcing plans to levy retaliatory tariffs against Canada farm and food imports. How concerned are you about these, I guess, seeming ripple effects from Trump's calls for tariffs on global trade?
Well, in terms of the ripple effects, I think we need to actually go back to last summer when Canada very much aligned with the U.S. on the same team on imposing tariffs on EVs and steel. And now when you look at the timing of these tariffs China is imposing on Canada, I think it's safe to assume and take that as a very clear message to Canada, putting pressure on the country of thinking very carefully where one aligns. And if one aligns, the message might be with the U.S., then you are in the crosshairs with China. And that has huge impacts on our producers. My family farms, they produce canola, they raise pigs. These impacts are very, very real. And I think, Alex, and it was on your program earlier today, the biggest grievances that the America First trade policy is trying to solve for don't lie with Canada. In fact, Canada is the #1 partner who can align with the U.S. in, bringing back manufacturing and restoring trade balances, working together in partnership. Canada plays by the rules, and I think we have to remember who's important to have on the team.
Let me ask you quickly, is it clear to Canadians what Donald Trump wants and why? You have heard him say he wants to annex Canada, make it the 51st state. He's rather disrespectfully referred to Justin Trudeau as a governor, which would be of a state. Is it clear to you what he wants?
Well, I hope to get some clarity today because I need to hope for a pivot today and that some of that jab, I'll call it, with the 51st state commentary was directed at Prime Minister Trudeau. And we know the relations could have been much better there between President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau. So, Alex, fingers crossed. I think and hope we see a shift. I would expect that to pivot today. And we can look at ending the tariff war and pivoting into a discussion of our shared interests. I would say the other things Canadians are grappling with is just, we're swept up in these broad tariffs. We have these false statements, and claims made about the imbalance of our trade relationship when it's balanced, unfair, like where numbers come from on tariffs we're supposedly imposing, which we're not. These things are clearly outlined in our USMCA trade agreement, and that's where we need to steer into next, is get back at the table, have real discussions, not social posts about our trade relationship.
But I agree. You can keep your fingers crossed as you're back at that table. Candice Lang, thank you so much. Good to talk with you. Well, joining me now here in the studio, we have former Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh. That was news to me, what she just reported, that Volodymyr Zelensky is not sticking around for the meetings. It's not a meeting with Donald Trump. That I might not expect 10 days after the blow-up in the Oval Office. What can be accomplished without Volodymyr Zelensky at the table?
Maybe it's a good thing. We still, I think, need some cooler heads to prevail. And so you have each other's counterparts there to engage and kind of get into the substance of whatever this so-called ceasefire to a peace deal looks like. I think that's okay. And at the end of the day, because Donald Trump is not there at those talks, I don't think it necessarily makes sense for Zelensky to be part of those talks. But, people like the Minister of Defense, like Umerov and others, are probably sitting in those meetings alongside the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
So it's my understanding as well that Mohammed bin Salman, that he's not going to be part of the meetings between the United States and Ukraine at whatever level. So the fact that Volodymyr Zelensky speaks to Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, what is it? I mean, you worry a little bit about, coconut. Okay, you've told him something and then he's going to pass it on. Is that how that's going to work?
Yeah, I think you always have to be worried about a little bit about that game of telephone. I think also Zelensky is being smart and understands that this is a partner and a relationship that the United States has. And so that, he can express his views and concerns. And there is a go between the United States and the Ukrainians, even though, I think it's still important that the United States and Ukraine are meeting at the table. And that is a good thing. We do want to see that relationship move forward, that dust up in the Oval Office. I think we talked after that. That was quite astonishing for the world to see. It's now time to chart a new way forward.
Okay. By the way, you called it telephone. I called it coconut. It's kind of the West Coast girl in me. Right. All right. I want to go to something that NBC News has reported. In addition to signing this mineral deal to restart and continue with the intelligence sharing, restart the military aid, Trump wants Ukraine to give up territory that Russia has taken in this war and hold a new presidential election. He basically wants Volodymyr Zelensky to step down as president. Trump has said that Ukraine has no choice but to make a peace deal with Russia. What does that mean for Ukraine right now, then? And what do you expect to come from these talks?
Well, I think the reality is for the Trump administration is that Ukraine absolutely has a choice. It's their sovereign territory that we're talking about. The unfortunate thing here is that Donald Trump is negotiating basically on behalf of Russia, saying that Ukraine should hold elections in Ukraine. 20% of the country is occupied by Russia. So how do you
They have said we're not holding for this reason.
And that's in their constitution.
Correct.
So it's not that Zelensky doesn't want to hold elections. They literally can't. How would you even go about doing it? How would you have a fair and free election? And just ask Vladimir Putin about that. They have not seen one under Putin's reign in Russia. So I think it's really hard for Donald Trump to be saying, well, Ukraine has to give up some of its territory. Russia invaded its sovereign neighbor. So again, we're using Russian talking points here.
I want you to take a listen to some of what Congressman Seth Moulton told me yesterday when I asked about the new tariffs that Trump imposed on China and then Beijing's response that it could retaliate with a trade war or, quote, here's the quote, any other type of war. Okay, listen to this.
The chances of war are going up dramatically with China. And I've seen this report from many analysts who are looking at the chances that Xi Jinping basically sees a green light from Putin for what Putin is getting from Trump in Europe and decides to invade Taiwan, something that could literally set off World War III. Even if the chances of a war over Taiwan are, say 20%, that's a really bad chance of something catastrophic happening to the world, to our troops, to our economy.
Do you agree with that? Is Donald Trump poking a hornet's nest?
I think Donald Trump is poking a hornet's nest in that by catering and by allowing us to renege on some of our commitments to our allies and partners. I mean, look at him saying that we might not defend NATO countries if they don't spend what Donald Trump thinks they need to spend as part of the alliance. I think that is signaling to China that, the United States might not be there for their partners and allies all around the world, and maybe we take advantage of this moment. And, China is continuing to develop militarily and economically. They're the only country in the world right now that could really upend the international rules-based order. So I think it is really important that, China is looking to the United States, looking at the rhetoric coming out of this administration, and probably making some calculations on its own, which, like Congressman Seth Moulton raised, that is something that we should really think about, and that, should be a little scary to the system here.
Yeah, for sure. Sabrina Singh, it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
See you again soon.